Good evening and welcome to our panel event tonight, Black History is Utah History. My name is Rebecca West and I work as a Teen Services Librarian with the Salt Lake City Public Library. We are so happy to have you join us for this important and timely conversation. We would like to acknowledge that the coordination for this evening's panel discussion was led out and influenced by high school students from right here in Salt Lake City, 3 of whom are panelists tonight. This panel will explore ways to incorporate the history of all Utahns with a focus on our Black community in Utah education, as well as the importance of providing complete, honest, and diverse history in education. This event is held in partnership with the Salt Lake City Public Library, the Salt Lake City Mayor's Office, and Youth City Government. We are very excited to introduce our moderator for the evening, Utah House Representative Sandra Hollins.
Good evening. I'm Utah State Representative Sandra Hollins. I represent District 23, which is the northwest side of Salt Lake City, and I've been in office since 2015.
Thank you, Representative Hollins. Our youth panelists come to us from Youth City Government, a local program of Salt Lake City Corporation that involves teens in state-organized model government programs. With us today are Dia Uman, Amira Bade, and Sophie Ayers-Harris. Dia?
Hi, I'm Dia and I'm a freshman at West High School. I'm a part of Youth City Government and I'm excited to be here today because it's time for Black history education to be discussed.
Hi, I'm Amira Bade and I'm a sophomore at East High School, and I'm really excited to be here because I think that Black history and how it's taught in schools is a very important topic.
Hi, I'm Sophie Ayers-Harris. I'm a junior at Rowland Hall. I'm really excited to be part of this discussion because I think understanding Black history is really essential to understanding all of American history.
Thank you. Our youth panelists will be joined by Mohammed Bade from the Salt Lake City Board of Education, Precinct 5.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mohammed Bade. I am a school board member for Salt Lake City, District 5, and I've been in the office since January 5th, not very long. Very, very pleased and very honored to be part of this panel because the time is here to be able to teach and find out the true history of our Black families. Looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Mohammed. For our attendees, please note that you can submit questions using the Q&A function, which will be reviewed and submitted to our moderator. Hate speech of any kind and inappropriate questions will not be tolerated. We now welcome Representative Hollins to begin this evening's conversation as we bring light to this critical topic and hope to influence education policy and curriculum on a state and local level. Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I will first like to say again, thank you to Salt Lake City Public Library, to Salt Lake City Mayor's Office, and to Youth City Government for having this conversation this evening. And thank you to the audience who have tuned in to listen and to understand and to get a perspective on why we feel or why these young people would like to see Black history taught in our school system. I want to first start off telling you a little bit about my history. I was born and raised in Louisiana, in New Orleans, and I went to an all-Black elementary, junior and senior high school. And because of that, and because of the teachers that I was under, I was taught Black history because Black history is American history. And so I was given a really strong foundation of history, Black history, which gave me a strong foundation of who I am as a Black woman in America. I went to an all-Black college, an HBCU in Mississippi, and I was fortunate again under the tutelage of teachers and instructors and professors who managed to weave Black history into everyday lessons and was able to give me a strong foundation and teach me about my past, which in turn helped with my self-esteem. And so I think it's very important. I raised two of my daughters here. Both of them went to West High. And I was quite surprised to find out that Black history was not taught on the level that I had received it. Most of what my daughters know, well, all of what my daughters know about their history is because I have taught it. And what they learned in the school system was mainly around Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. But we know that our history, they are wonderful people, have done a lot, but our history is bigger than that. Also, that we have a very, very rich history, and our history did not start with Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and the Civil Rights Movement. So I'm glad we're here to talk about this. So I want to bring the panel in right now and have a conversation around why this is important to us. So I want to start with our students, and I want to start with the question of, I want to hear your story. I want to hear your experience in the school system and learning about diverse history and what was taught or what you feel was missing. So I want to start first with Dia.
Yeah. Personally, I never really learned much about Black history other than the Civil Rights Movement. Um, and I find that it's so much more important to listen and learn about what really affected Blacks in America. I mean, I had never learned about the Tuskegee trials, Loving versus Virginia, or the Tulsa Race Massacre in school. All of that learning happened outside of school, which I think is just not fair because it's not the same for everyone. I mean, it's such an integral part of how our modern history is being shaped, and I don't think it's fair that so many of us young people don't have that same learning and education that goes into building those feelings around like the current situation that's happening right now.
Yes, and great point. Very good point that knowing our past and how it shapes where we are now in our future, I think it's very important that we is a really good reason why we should learn about our past. Um, Amira?
Yeah, so similar to Dia, I myself have not learned a lot about Black history in school. A lot of it has been taught to me, fortunately, by my parents, and they've educated me, and I've learned a lot from them, and I'm very grateful for that. But there are a lot of people out there whose parents aren't as willing to talk and have these difficult conversations with their kids, and I think it's resulting in like people not being able to understand how our nation was shaped. I think that the US it was built on the backs of African Americans, and people need to understand that, and it needs to be talked more about in schools. So,
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And like like I said earlier, that's how my daughters learn. I had a conversation with my youngest daughter today, and I was telling her about this panel. And she said she had a conversation with one of her coworkers or one of her friends, and she was talking about Black history and things she didn't know. And my daughter said, well, apparently you didn't grow up in my house because you would have known all of this because my parents, they drilled it into us, our history. Okay, so Sophie, what is your opinion? What is your experience?
I'd say my experience is really a mixed bag. I think while, especially in high school, I've had a lot of classes that have had an emphasis on narratives from people of color and Black people. I think there's not enough. And and I'd say especially in elementary school, like when we learned about American history and Utah history, there was very little on Black history and how that really ties into this larger story. And there have been a lot of times where I've learned about things from my parents or a news article, and I say to myself, wait, why haven't I learned this in school? Because this is so important. So I think learning Black history and really understanding it equips us in dealing with current issues around systemic racism.
Yes, absolutely. I want to bring you in, Muhammad, because you have two different hats that you're wearing, two different perspectives as a school board elected official for the school board, but also as a parent. What has been your experience?
It really has been quite an interesting journey in so many levels. But first, let me just take you back to my first time arriving here to US and not really knowing much about the African American history. And even going through college, literally speaking, not knowing much either. And being here and being able to see my kids go to school and just me asking them, so how is the Black history taught at school? And it is very, it is heartening in so many ways to hear that it's only like a chapter, in the book of history. Knowing that uh, our lives or lives of African Americans, it was not just a chapter in the life of America, but rather it was a journey, and it continues to be a journey. And as a school board member, definitely we have so much to do out there. But I'm at the same time, looking at the new superintendent who will be coming in, who is very committed to equity. And I'm anxiously waiting to see how that's going to be actually applied, especially in the course and the curriculum of including more of Black history in the school system.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you this. I know that there has been pushback with teaching any type of um, Black history within a school system. We saw particularly this past February, there was pushback from some parents who wanted to opt their kids out of learning anything about Black history. Why do you think there's a hesitation? What do you think the hesitation is surrounding teaching this history? And I'm going to go backwards this time. I'm going to start with Sophia.
Um, I think that a big part of, this proud American identity is that um, like the Americans fought hard against the tyrannical British and, won rights for all and really built this nation out of nothing. So, and I think there's a lot of pride and I think there's a lot of truth in that. But at the same time, talking about what was going on at the same time and the fact that slavery was happening at the same time really kind of disrupts this narrative, and it can be kind of upsetting to people who, are very set in this narrative.
Okay. Amira, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that the topic of teaching more Black history has a lot of pushback because I think people only really think of Black history as slavery, and they don't think about all of the successes and all the good things that have also, like all the successful people, all the successful Black women and men that have also um, like been incorporated into our history. I think that, and of course, slavery is definitely a hard topic, but I think that it's something that needs to be discussed, even if people push back against it. And like Sophie said, like it's hard to see the nation that you love so much be built on something as horrible as slavery. And I think that people don't want to interrupt that perfect narrative of the like America seeming perfect when really it was built on the backs of African Americans.
Yes, absolutely. It's a part of our past, it's a part of our dark history, but nonetheless, it is a part of our history that we need to learn from and that we need to know that happened. Dia?
I think a lot of it surrounds the lack of conversation after each incident of violence or abuse of power. I think we sort of try and protect our privilege in a way. And I mean, just like Amira said, we ignore um, how able we are to, how we feel about our history. Um, we really need a good education on more than just the raw statistics because they really mean nothing when we can't put faces or stories or ideas to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do have a rich history. Right here in Utah, we have a rich history here that I think people will be surprised to learn about. Muhammad, what is your thoughts? What do you think the pushback is?
The pushback is the fact that the community is so comfortable where they are.
Mhm.
They are afraid of stepping out of their comfort zone. And I understand that, especially here in Utah, where the majority is white. And, the African Americans are about a little over 20,000 here in Utah. And so, with that said, I can understand why some families would be pushing back. However, you know however, for us to make a change is we have to take it upon ourselves and move forward. We have to be able to be courageous and find resources out there to be involved and be able to really take ourselves out of our comfort zone. To give you an example, in my life coming here to US, I could have chosen to stay within my comfort zone of the Moroccan community or the comfort zone of just my immigrant friends and so. But instead, I decided to step out of my comfort zone. And because of that, I had the honor and the privilege of meeting people from all walks of life and being able to understand as much as possible for people from all walks of life. And that is very, very important. And so for the families who are pushing back, I beg of you, I urge you that you go and discover so many things here in Utah that will actually help you discover more about the Black history. Don't push against that because we are part of the history.
Mhm.
We are.
Yes, yes, we are. One of the things I always say that I feel that my daughters had an advantage is that I taught them about people from different religion, different cultures, and different backgrounds. And so my daughters feel comfortable being around anybody and having conversation with anybody because they understand different histories and embrace different histories. With that being said, let me ask you the question about having a diverse curriculum and why do you feel is important that we have such a diverse curriculum in our school system? And I am going to start with Dia.
I think one thing that really struck me is now with COVID, we hear all the time about how it's getting harder and harder to reach and vaccinate African Americans, but we never really hear about the fear that all of those thoughts are based on, the fear from the Tuskegee trials that accompany that hesitation. We need to show what really happened so that we can come to those thoughts nowadays. It's so evident in today's world that that fear hasn't really been erased, and at the very least we could begin to understand how it's necessary to heal from that.
Absolutely. When we start looking at COVID, we can see and trying to get people vaccinated. That is so true. We see our history coming to play. And for those who don't know what she's speaking of, study the Tuskegee experiment. And you'll know more why, particularly Black people, are very hesitant to take the vaccine. I'm going to move on to Amira. What are your thoughts?
Well, so my thoughts on incorporating Black history into the curriculum is that, like, I think for me at least, and I feel like it would be this way for a lot of people, like it's important to incorporate it into the curriculum because it it's about inclusivity. Like it's about making sure that Black people feel included in their communities, especially when you go to a predominantly white school, you live in a predominantly white state, and predominantly white history is taught. I think that's something that really struck me, is that like inclusivity is a very important thing, and Black people need to feel like their history is just as important as white people's history.
Hmm. Absolutely. Sophie?
I think it's really important to teach Black history in school curriculums because Black history and American history are inseparable. They they are entwined and they are the same thing. And I think we can't really fully understand our history if we do not acknowledge and understand Black history and include a multitude of narratives from different people and different groups of people. Because with that understanding, we will be able to address the issues we face today, with systemic racism and how issues from so long ago have carried on to now. And like I said, I think we're not equipped to face those issues if we don't have proper education about the history behind them.
Okay. And Mr. Muhammad, what's your thoughts?
We owe it to our students to have the opportunity to learn about the Black history. As we were just talking about the pushback against, having the history of Black taught at school, the new generation and the future generation, the only way for us to avoid such a pushback in the future is for us actually to be able to include that and have it be part of the curriculum. These schools are schools for Black, white, brown, for everyone. It is part of the American dream, and we need to have that be a part of the curriculum.
Absolutely. So I have a question. I actually have two questions from the audience. I'm going to ask one now, and one I'm going to save to the end because it was one of the questions I had as we talking about solutions. The question is for the young panelists. What do you wish your elementary school teachers had known or done better with regards to teaching Black history? Dia?
I think one thing that we could have focused on, like Amira had said, is not just focusing on the idea that Black history in America surrounds the civil rights movement. It really is so much more than that. And we really need to focus on like the power that Black people in America have had and still have, and the things that they've been able to do.
Absolutely. Sophie?
I kind of feel like Black history shouldn't just be exclusively taught in a lesson here and there, because like Black history, like I've said, is a part of American history, and I think that it shouldn't be like Black history shouldn't be put in its own little box and just saved for a few lessons here and there, but rather as the larger curriculum. And also, in my experience, I didn't really learn a lot of Black history. I never learned about the role or the impact Black people have had on Utah. And it's really disappointing to me that I know nothing about Black history in Utah. And I think it's really disappointing that that wasn't part of the curriculum I was learning from at a young age.
Absolutely. Amira?
Well, kind of to touch on what like Sophie said, it's not a lesson here and there. I wish something that was different in elementary school is that like little things were integrated more, like more books about black kids and strong black women aren't just Rosa Parks and strong people like Martin Luther King, and they're great, but I think that those are two that are really focused on in Black history, and I think we need to branch out, and we also need to like if I had had a lot more books read to me about strong Black women, I think I would have been a lot more confident growing up as a Black girl in America. And I really wish that it was integrated more into the education system.
Absolutely. When we start reading about our history and started studying our history, and you look at all of especially the inventors, and all of the things, how a lot of their inventions, a lot of what we use today came from those inventions. And a lot of those individuals were never acknowledged, unfortunately, but still in all, is there, and we need to appreciate it, and we need to value it. And like you said, it's a part of our history, and especially here in Utah. I'm still learning a lot about Utah history and a lot about all of the wonderful things that Blacks have done in this state. And it still amazes me. It still absolutely amazes me. So yes, so let's move on to the next question. And I'm going to start with you, Muhammad. What are the different approaches to learning, teaching, distributing, and creating a curriculum that's inclusive for all history, and why is it important?
Well, it is, there are so many ways in actually, approaching the learning of Black history. So the way we can start is first by diversifying the pool of teachers who will be teaching the history. So, having a person of color teaching about the
Mhm.
Black history is actually gonna mean a lot more to the students, even the white students. So that's one. And in regards to distributing the materials, or distributing the approach of distributing the information about the Black history, there are so many ways. I mean, the media, the only time it talks about Black history or Black people, I would say, is when there is like an atrocity somewhere, or when there is a dramatic experience. Instead, we want, for example, here in Utah, when they take time to talk about the pioneer's life, the pioneer's day, and the history behind it, we would encourage the media as well to be very involved in actually, just having a day of talking about the Black history and its importance here in Utah. And so there are so many other things. And when it comes to the curriculum, it's going to be a very rich and solid curriculum, because it's going to cover so many things. I mean, it cannot just be a chapter. It is gonna have to be like a class that's just like for Black history, because the history itself is so rich, and it takes a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of work, but it can happen, and it will happen for sure.
Mhm. Okay, I'm gonna mix things up. I'm gonna go with Sophie first. Let's put you first.
Um, you know, I think really Black history should be taught, and I also think while there are a lot of ugly and bad things, like we also should celebrate Black culture and Black history, because it's like Black culture is so unique and it has such a rich history, and I think that's really important to learn about. And I really think by learning about that, we can, you know, we as a whole can be more accepting of other people, and with that acceptance we can make strides in our society and really, make a difference and treat people fairly.
Okay. Thea, what's your opinion?
I think one of the most important things we can do is truly integrate Black history into our curriculums. All too often, I've seen the civil rights movement be slipped out during Black History Month, and while that's a good start, it's important to talk about it. It's so startling to see it forgotten about as soon as March 1st rolls around.
Yeah, I agree. It's compacted into just 28 days a month. Amira, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and to touch on like Black History Month, I think a lot of people will post about it and talk about it well during Black History Month, but it's a year-round thing, and I think that needs to be integrated into our education system. And I think one of the most important things is kind of ridding the stigma that surrounds teaching Black history. And I think something that I recognized when I was younger, and when I was in elementary school and middle school, is that teachers sometimes feel uncomfortable talking about it because they don't know maybe the correct terms to use, or they don't know exactly how to discuss it and feel comfortable discussing it in front of students. And I was always the person looked to. My teachers would always ask me like, what do you prefer to be called? And like I really appreciate that, but I think that people need to get more comfortable with talking about Black history in schools, and I think that will make it a lot easier and a lot more like a lot easier to accept.
Okay. So I have a question that came through Facebook, and I'm just going to throw it out there, and any one of you all can answer it. It says, does the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints religion have anything to say about African Americans? And if so, how does that manifest in Utah? I can say this. I cannot speak and say what they have said because I've never had this conversation with members, at least leadership in the church around this topic. So I cannot say what they would have to say. I can say this, that there are a number of Black historians in this state who are of that religion of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who are of that religion, who I have learned a lot about history in the state of Utah. And I know that they have been out there assuring that our history is taught and have actually held conferences in this state around our genealogy and around Black history. And assuring that it is carried out and that it is taught in this state. So that has been my experience. Like I said, most of my experience have been with the Black African American members of this church who have been assuring that it is taught in this state. Anybody else have any feedback or input? Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. What measures can educators, administrators, and I'm going to even put it out there, parents, can take to ensure that Black history is taught in a safe and informative environment in our schools? So what can our educators do? What can our parents do to ensure that it is taught in our school system? Who do I start with first? Amira, let's start with you first.
Well, I think what parents and teachers and administrators can do is that they can do their best to make sure that like the students feel comfortable, that everyone, and I, like my dad said earlier, like you do need to push yourself out of your comfort zones, and you do need to push yourself to try and learn more and more about Black history, and push yourself to learn even past Black history of all different histories. But I think that the most important thing is letting the students know that they are allowed to speak their truths, and let them know that they're feeling comfortable, especially the Black students, because I think that Black students have a lot to say, and oftentimes they feel scared that they'd be judged, or that maybe even their teachers would not support them. But I think that it just needs to overall be a really supporting community, so that they're able to share their truths, so that people can learn even more and more about Black history.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's important for teachers to feel confident about what they're talking about, and to really give us like personal details about stories of Black Americans. I think we look at it too much from like a historical, almost statistical perspective, where we don't really feel like we know what they felt. I think we also need to just make sure that younger children are being exposed to Black culture and Black stories more often and at a younger age, even if that includes watching the news and listening to what is happening at an age-appropriate perspective, of course. But I think just not blocking out the world around them before it's too late and they don't understand how this all came to a head when they were 10 years old or something.
Okay. Muhammad, as a person on the school board, what's your opinion? What do you think needs to be done?
You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I always have problem with that. It's contagious, and I'll be careful, everyone. So when it comes for parents, okay, I urge every parent to actually get in touch with their legislators.
Mhm.
That is the way to make it happen, because we are here as a panel. We are sitting, we share our feelings, our thoughts about it as Blacks, but also we need to understand that the legislators have the pen to actually sign on having a curriculum be taught here. And for teachers, words are not enough to express how much pressure you're on. It's been a hard and rough year. And of course, if you're not given the tools to be able to do that, that can make it very hard. But I know for sure that the district has been very committed in actually making sure that the curriculum is more diverse. And I am so excited when Dr. Gatson comes in. He will actually, be bringing a new, fresh, new. I would say, what is the saying? A breath of a fresh air.
Breath
Is
of
that what
fresh
it is?
air to the
Yes, yes,
conversation.
yes. And him bringing those ideas and experience, it actually is going to help a lot. And I'm hoping that the legislators will be able to have an open mind and an open heart and a desire to actually bring in this into our school system here in Utah. We need it. We owe it to every student, Black or white or brown, and we have to have it. And for administrators, work with your teachers, listen to them, take their points, and through them, you are actually the bridge to reach us as the elected individuals to this office. And at the same time, us as school board members, we are actually, anytime the information we come up with the idea and then we give it to the district to take action on it. And so with this said, please contact your legislators. Contact your legislators. They have the power to make this happen or not make it happen. But you are the voters and you need to do that because it'll make a big difference.
Yes. And also, two things pop in mind as you were talking about that. I don't know if the audience is aware that you all, the school board, just hired a new superintendent, and he is the first, to my knowledge, the first African American to have that position. Could you just talk briefly about that?
Um, it is such, I don't know how to even put it. It's been like an amazing transition and change. This is the first time in the history of Utah that the school board in Salt Lake City is going to have a minority majority. One. And two, the first time in the history to that we will have an African American be actually the big boss of schooling system here in Salt Lake City. So that just speaks of the quality. Dr. Gatson, he is a man of family, a man of passion, a man that is very committed to making sure that equity is shared across the board, especially when it comes to education. And so there is so much in there. The old ways of doing things are out the door.
Mhm.
Now, we live in a new inclusive environment. And just to give you uh, a quick idea how it all happened. So there is a scoring metrics that's given to us by the hiring by the agency that is hired to find the candidates, and that scoring measure is given, to all of us, the board members, and all of us have to score it, and then it's turned in back to the agency, and it is all anonymous.
Mhm.
Everyone scores and then they submit it. And then we go ahead And every one of us, all of us, really, really appreciated what Dr. Gatson stands for and what's going to bring to our district here.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here that came through Facebook. And the question is to everyone: who is the individual you wish you would have learned about at a much younger age? I'm a pre-K kindergarten educator, and I'm honored to teach a diverse history and cultural lesson all through the academic year. As a person of color myself, I make sure my students have literature and lessons that represent all Americans. My 3 to 6 year old students particularly love learning about Ruby Bridges and Mae Jamerson. So, who are some of the people that you know about now that you wish that you would have learned when you were younger in elementary school? Dia.
I think those two are perfect examples for preschool and kindergarten age children, especially because I know that as a child in kindergarten, I really enjoyed learning about Ruby Bridges, especially just because of her bravery. I think just in general, in elementary school or middle school, I would have really enjoyed learning about Malcolm X because I know he sort of clashes against our perfect idea of Martin Luther King's nonviolence ideas about contradicting racism, but I think learning about how nonviolence wasn't just the only way um, black blacks in America were able to gain their independence is a key part of our history. I think we really need to learn about how you can't just shy away from the harder parts of history, and it's really important to talk about individuals like Malcolm X who really changed the world.
Yes. Okay. Amira?
Well, two people that I really wish I'd learned more about would be Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, because I think that when I did a project when I was in 6th grade on the Harlem Renaissance, and it really taught me that it Black history isn't only about slavery, that there are beautiful things that have happened in Black history as well. And I think that these two people have just such a beautiful way with words, and they express so much through their words, and they express what it's like to be an African American through their words in a way that just is comforting, but it also displays the hard truths. And I think that I learned a lot from them, and I just really look up to them both as people in history.
Mm-hmm. Sophie, what is someone you wish you would have learned about?
I really wish I would have learned about, like Dia, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton, and also James Baldwin. I think, you know, Malcolm X and Fred Hampton really, they were not really a part of the nonviolence movement and the civil rights movement, but but despite the fact that they didn't hold a lot of the same, you know, beliefs about how to achieve civil rights as like Martin Luther King, I think they're really important to understand and what they stood for as well. And um, James Baldwin, the author, I think he, just based on the few things I've read, he has such a unique style of writing, and there's just so much substance in what he said. And I think, you know, reading that would be really just, I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, yeah. I could tell you some of my favorite people. Dorothy Height. I love Dorothy Height and reading about her, but also Fannie Lou Hamer. I am a huge fan of Fannie Lou Hamer. I haven't been quiet about that, and because she managed to take on the entire system in Mississippi and demanding voter rights. And I think her story, even though this happened in the 40s and 50s and 60s, is very relevant now with everything that is happening in our country. And so this past summer, I had a chance to go to Mississippi, had a family emergency, but had a chance to get out a while and had an actual chance to visit her gravesite, and just kind of sit there and kind of honor her and all that she's done. And because, I'm always quick to honor our ancestors because I know of the work they have done is the reason why I'm here today. So she is one of my favorite. So I have another question here, and it says, how do textbooks and mandated tests enhance or detract from providing inclusive education, and how can it be improved? Mohammed, what's your thoughts? I've got to say, I'm not a big fan of mandated tests. As a mother of a teacher, and I hear her struggles in the education system with mandated tests, I can tell you that I'm not the biggest fan of mandated tests. So, what's your thoughts?
You know, great minds think alike. Um, the reason I say so is because, um, uh, having a mandated test, unfortunately, disadvantages the Black community. The reason I say so, because it has been found and it has been proven, the data, that the white students, when they are tested, they are doing, they do considerably well in testing, and so they get admitted to the programs easily. Whereas for the African Americans, in this case, it is hard. The number of students who really test high is slim to none. And it is, I'm personally, remove the testing and have the student be evaluated through their teachers. So the teachers can actually, through recommendations, can help assess and decide where to put that student and what are the things they're excelling on. But the testing is just, it's not fair. It really is not fair. Some people are good at taking tests and some are not. And I'm one of those that is not, for sure.
Hmm. Okay. And I'm going to just kind of throw this question out there to the students. If any one of you all have any thoughts on it, and I'm going to read it again. So, how do textbooks and mandated tests enhance or detract from providing inclusive education, and how can it be improved? Any of you all have any thoughts or opinions?
Well, I think that textbooks, what I've been thinking about is that textbooks often have one point of view, and often that point of view in history is the point of view of a white male. And I think that if textbooks need to be more inclusive in the perspectives of Black women and Black men in history, because even if it is discussed in textbooks, it's usually from the point of view of a white person. And I think that that's often because Black people were discriminated against, so they weren't able to write and they weren't able to talk quite as much about how they were feeling, so they weren't able to document their thoughts. But I think that if we dug deep, we'd be able to find more perspectives from people of color and Black people in history, and I think that that's a really important point of view.
Okay. Any other thoughts from our students?
I think a lot of it is that textbooks try to encompass all of Black history into one chapter, maybe two chapters when we get 4 or 5 on the war against the British and how we tried to fight against that. I think it's harder when they're trying to combine such a rich history into just a few pages, and even then, those pages don't get much focus in class. So I think it's not about not using the textbook, but more about using other resources as well to further that knowledge, because the textbooks aren't really doing much.
Okay.
I also think that, the idea is that textbooks are supposed to be kind of an objective source of information, but I think it's impossible for them to be objective if the material in them is only coming from narratives of, you know, um, of Anglo-American white men. So I think including other narratives and other sides of history would really add to the material in textbooks, because you get a bigger picture, and a better understanding.
Okay, thank you for that. So as we're beginning to wind down, I have one last question for you all to answer. As we've seen, different states throughout the United States are taking different approaches to Black history. I know that Texas, and I don't know if this was recently, they have Black history as an elective, and there are some that have passed laws. The legislature have passed laws looking at requiring it in their school system. So, with that being said, I would love all of you all to take a minute or two and just talk about what kind of classes or policy or changes do you want to see come from this conversation? What do you want to? Where do you see this going? What do you think is the next step in all of this? Um, and I will start with you, Sophie.
Um, I think Black history, teaching Black history in schools is definitely something that should be required, because I don't feel like, just taking one part of history and just saying, this is optional. I don't think that's fair. And I think we owe it to everyone to teach the whole history of our country. And I also think that like curriculums should really, like in our curriculums, we should really, like, whether it be an elective or just part of our normal courses, I think, learning about different cultures and learning about Black histories should be something engaging and exciting rather than just like another elective you have to take. And because we have so much to learn from each other, and I think there's so much to people and there's so much to Black history.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Sophia. Dia?
I think the issue comes where, at the very least, Texas is bringing it as an elective, but Black history isn't an elective. Black history is American history, and there's no way that we can be like allowed to ignore it in our education system when it affects so many around us, and us as well. I'm not part of the Black community, but I think starting with elective classes is a good change, but I think it's important that we make it into some sort of mandatory part, whether it's a mandatory class or a mandatory change to the curriculum. I think it's important that we factor it into everyday life in the education system.
Okay. Amira, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that, like, as everyone else has said, like, I feel like if Black history was an elective, it would make Black students feel a little bit less important, because white history is taught, European history is taught, and it's not an elective. You have to take US history in classes, and I think that Black history should be incorporated into US history. Otherwise, it's not fair to the Black students, because as I said before, inclusivity is something important to me, because Black students Black people are already the minority in Utah, one of the minorities in Utah, and we need to feel included in the curriculum, because white history is already the norm. It's something that is going to be taught regardless, and I think that teaching Black history should become the norm as well. It shouldn't be something that people can choose whether or not they do.
Okay, I agree. Mr. Muhammad.
The time is here to make our education system a bit less comfortable. Be ready for new things, and so it is very humbling when I see these young ladies over here. They are a representation of future leaders who will represent the Black community. Not only the Black community, but also represent, systems that will transform how our education system will be functioning in the future. And so the conversations like what we've had here today is just a starting point. This is just a fuel we just put in the vehicle that's already been moving slowly. But all of us here, and including families that are listening, are actually going to be helping us drive that vehicle forward. We need that to happen here in Utah. It should not be an elective. It should be actually a course in the system. Before you get to finish your high school, this is something you need to learn. This is something you need to know about. That way, when you go out of here and go to another state where majority are Black, you're not going to be afraid or feel estranged. Instead, you will feel you belong. And that's what we have to get in this conversation here today.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, as an elected official, that I am committed to this. I am committed to trying to move this forward. And there is conversation that is being had in our community, not only with educators, but with parents who are interested in this topic and interested in how do we bring this in our public school system or in our school system to assure that their child is taught and that Black history knowing that it's a part of American history, that it is taught in our school system. And it's something that has been talked about for a long time. And of course, whenever you're challenging someone's thoughts and pushing them to think different, there's going to be pushback, and there has been some pushback. And I would encourage individuals who are listening, who are interested in this, to have that conversation with your school board member, have that conversation with individuals in the state school board, have this conversation with your elected official. You are a voting member. You are a citizen. You have that right to have that conversation. And to push this forward. So I'm looking forward to continuing to have this conversation and look at what policy changes that we can make in this state to ensure that everyone's history is included when we are teaching in our school system. I just want to briefly address, someone asked me a question about a policy that a resolution that I was running around, making racism a public and moral health crisis, and what can they do to help push this forward. I can tell you this: you need to contact your legislator and let them know why this is important to you. There was an organized effort this past session to take this bill down. It was very organized, and I think people who want this to pass need to be just as organized as the people who don't want this to pass. So that would be what I would say, some of the next steps that need to happen. With that, I want to say thank you to each one of our panelists for being here and for being brave and being bold. Stepping out and putting yourself out there as leaders is not easy. I know it's not easy. And so I just want to tell you that I'm very proud of each and every one of you all that's on this panel and your leadership ability. And I look forward to seeing the wonderful, wonderful things that all of you all are going to be doing in the future. So with that being said, I just want to thank our audience. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for listening. Thank you.